start.
What are you guys saying?
Having heart trouble.
Are you guys ready?
Oh, that's awesome.
We think he's having our.
Whoa.
No one cares.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah. I took it. Click exit out of that. Sorry, I'm just trying to help you out.
Okay, I can. Hi guys, today we're going to talk to you about selection. I'm going to go over the selection process. Tara's going to go over criteria development.
All right, Bree, you gotta police your area. There's a Valentine's Day something pop up there you gotta get rid of. And you should probably full screen it so we don't have to see all the stuff on the top. What's that? Is that your? I'm not familiar with what you do.
I really don't know either, honestly.
Okay, let's
Wait,
do
so-
this. Bring it up and then just drop it down into a PowerPoint and bring it up into a PowerPoint.
What do you mean? Like that?
Download it.
Really? Is that good?
Yeah, that's fine.
Hi guys, we are going to talk to you guys about selection. I'm going to go over the selection process. Tara's going to go over criteria development and resume review. Nicolette's going to go over interviewing. Gina's going to go over testing and selecting. Nikki's going to go over making the offer. So first, to start with the selection process, this is the selection process. You start with criteria development, you move to application and resume review, you move to interviews, test administration, and then making the offer. This is an example of like an online application from Olive Garden. So basically what happens is most organizations develop an online application, and this is just an example. They determine which sources of info will be used and how these sources will be scored during the interview. And it involves discussing which skills, abilities, and personal characteristics are required to be successful. This is KSAO, stands for knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. This is an example for a lawyer. Their knowledge would be constitutional rights, writing clearly, communication, willingness to work long hours. A nurse would be, okay. Next, I'm going to talk about an interview plan. Basically, this is an interview plan. You determine what questions you want to ask, and in what order you want to ask them. You determine the priority of the questions. You anticipate possible answers and follow-up questions. You confirm areas of interviewee knowledge, and you inform the interviewee about any other processes. Once criteria is developed, the applications are reviewed. HR or management is going to be looking for specific criteria, and sometimes they go through a computer generator, which leads to a lot of weeding out, because in a computer generator, they usually put in keywords like what they want to see on your resume. This is hiring internal employees versus hiring external employees. So it's important to hire both. External employees can bring new ideas, perspectives, and styles, and bring information and training from competitors. Internal can bring firm-specific knowledge. So these are the types of interviews. Traditional would be like one-on-one, like in the first picture. A phone interview would obviously be over the phone. A panel interview would be multiple people interviewing one person, and an informational interview would be as like if somebody like in a lower position wanted to move up to a higher position, you can ask like, there's no specific job openings, but you can just have information on the job. These are other interview types: a group interview, a meal interview where you like an HR consultant would take you to dinner and have your interview over dinner, or an unstructured interview, which is where the candidate leads the interview with their questions. These are some illegal and legal interview questions. So it's very important, like, for interviewers not to ask illegal questions. 1 in 5 employers has asked a question in a job interview only to find out that it was illegal. So these are questions to ask an interviewer. So like if the interview is ever going like awkward, or you feel like you have to ask a question, these are some questions that you could ask. What skills is the ideal candidate for the position? How is performance measured in this job? Can you describe a typical day for this position? What are test administration? So An employer has the ability to administer as many tests that they want before a hiring decision is made. These tests include drug tests, physical tests, personality tests, and cognitive tests. So this is just an example of a drug test, and then say the color one is a cognitive test. These are more examples of tests that they can run on you, like once you submit your application. So reference checks, credit report checks, and background checks. Other ways that HR finds out about candidates is by looking through their social media and by calling their references. This is the most commonly used selection approach. The decision makers review the data, and based on what they learn from the candidate and the information available to them, they decide who should be hired for the job. There's room for error because the interviewers have a different perception about what the strengths of each candidate are. This is a statistical approach. A statistical approach is developed and it assigns scores and gives more weight to specific factors. The hiring team reviews the job analysis and job description and determines the criteria for the job. You then score the candidates and compare the score and choose the best candidate. Statistical approaches include the compensatory model, multiple cutoff model, and the multiple hurdle model. The compensatory model is a high score in an important area to make up for a lower score in another area. The multiple cutoff model requires that a candidate has a minimum score level on all selection criteria, and a multiple hurdle model, only candidates with high scores go to the next stages of the selection process. So making the offer. Making the offer and choosing the candidate is important because if the offer is not handled properly, you could lose the candidate or they could start off on the wrong foot. Questions that you can ask when making the offer are, if we were to make an offer today, when would you be in a position to accept it or reject it? And at what point, dollar-wise, would you accept our offer or want to reject it? What to keep in mind. What is the scarcity of the particular skill set? What are the going wages in your geographic area? What are the current economic conditions? In a tight labor market, waiting a week or two to offer your position may impact your ability to hire your first choice. So it's always important to make your offer as soon as possible. After making your offer, you give the candidate time to decide, but you don't want to give them too long because giving them too long results in losing other candidates. If they decide to reject your offer, it's likely that the candidate will come back asking for more money with benefits. Therefore, it's important to know what you can and cannot offer. Once the offer is made and the candidate accepts the offer, an email or letter should follow. This should outline the agreement details. The employee agreement offer letter should include job title, salary, other compensation, benefits, vacation time, paid holidays, and additional considerations such as relocation. Next, Tara is going to talk to you about criteria development and resume review.
So I'm Tara. I'm going to go over the first and the second step of the selection process, with the first step being the criteria development. So all individuals involved in the hiring process should be properly trained on the steps for interviewing, which include developing the criteria, reviewing the resumes, and going over and interview questions. The second step I'm going to discuss is the resume process, which usually comes after the criteria development, but before the interview process. And you usually go over the resumes after you figure out what it is you want. So the first aspect in the selection process is planning the interview, which includes developing the criteria. The criteria development means determining which sources of information will be used and how they will be used, scored during an interview, or how the sources will be scored during an interview. So the criteria development should be directly related to the job analysis as well as the job specifications. And the job analysis is a formal system that is gathered, developed to determine what tasks people perform in their jobs. And some job analysis and specifications may be the actual criteria. So the purpose of the job analysis is to ensure the creation of the right fit between the job and the employee, and to determine how the employee performance will be assessed. The information that is gathered from the job analysis is used both the job description and specifications. Is used for both job description and specifications. So the criteria development process involves discussing skills, personal characteristics, as well as the abilities that are required to be successful at any given jobs. And you want to include things such as personality as well as cultural fit, so that you can select the person that fits within your organization. So many HR professionals and managers develop the criteria for hiring as well as the interview questions before reviewing the resumes. This allows for a streamlined process with specific guidelines already set before reviewing resumes. For example, if I were to hire for a project management position, some of the criteria may be 2+ years of work experience, a bachelor's degree required, the ability to multitask, the ability to problem solve, and the ability to manage a team of maybe 5 or more. So by setting the criteria ahead of time, it gives the HR managers a clear picture of what qualifications they are looking for. And as a result, it makes it easier to determine who will move forward in the process and who will be qualified and not qualified. So for example, if someone doesn't have a bachelor's degree, given the criterion that they're looking for, the HR manager may just file their resume away, and maybe when another position opens up, they'll use that resume because maybe their job qualifications matches that job better. Likewise, HR managers can include the resumes with the bachelor's degree into the interview pile, and that way they can develop the interview questions based off the criteria. They can use it based off the applicant's problem-solving skills, multitasking skills, and management skills. So by developing the criteria before reviewing any resumes, HR managers or management can be sure that he and she is fair in selecting people, because it is illegal for an employer to discriminate any candidate in any part of the recruitment process based off age, disability, race, belief. Once the criteria has been developed, then the resumes can be reviewed. And people have different methods of going through this process, as everyone tends to perform it differently. So, for example, all the hiring decision makers may review all the resumes, list the people that they want to interview, and then compare the list, while other HR managers prefer to use a computer program that actually looks for keywords within the resume to narrow down the amount of resumes that they receive. And another method would be to rate each candidate and interview those above a certain score. Obviously, much of the process will all depend on the organization's size as well as the job that they're hiring for, but none of it can be done before developing the criteria. So when looking at resumes to determine who to interview, a manager should be concerned with the concepts of disparate treatment as well as disparate impact. And disparate impact is the unintended discrimination against a protected group as a whole through the use of a particular requirement. And some examples of this could be a requirement of a high school diploma, which may not be important to employment. It could discriminate against racial groups. Another example could be to take a written test that doesn't even apply to the job that you're applying for. And the last consideration in the resume review and the hiring review is internal employees versus external employees. And internal employees are basically the employees that already work for the organization, while external employees are the employees that work outside of the organization. So a bidding process may occur to notify all of the internal employees that a position has opened up. It's best to just do a thorough interview with the internal employees as well as the external employees. This way, HR managers can ensure disparate impact, that they're not using favoritism, or so that favoritism doesn't occur. So once you completed the criteria development, you reviewed the resumes, and you narrow down the candidates, you can then begin the interview process, which Nicolette is going to talk about.
Hello, my name is Nicolette, and I'll be continuing the discussion on selection, more specifically interviews and your questions. So as future HR professionals, at some point, we're most likely going to have to interview someone or go through the selection process. So there's real life examples and work life examples, and both of them are very costly. So it's important to make the right decision at the right time. So this is a real life example, purchasing a puppy. This is Raymond. Me and my boyfriend had purchased him this past summer, and we used our own selection process. We found him online, and we wanted to make sure that we were making the right decision because he was very, very expensive. So on the opposite end of the spectrum is the work-life example. So as recruiters, most likely in the future, will be selecting candidates for open positions, and this also is very costly and can be time-consuming. So you want to make sure that we make the right decision at the right time. And this is usually through a structured interview. So I want to go more into the types of interviews now that we talked about the selection process. The 8 that I'm going to talk about more in detail are traditional, telephone, panel, information, meal, group, video, and non-directive. So we're most familiar with the traditional type of interview, which is most common. This is usually in an office setting. One person is interviewing, asking the questions, the other person is answering the questions, which is the interviewee. Then we have telephone interviews. They can be used as interviews in themselves. For example, if you have 200 employees, you're down to, or 200 candidates, you're down to 25. It's easier to call to 25 people. Or you can use this telephone interview as a talk of salary if you've offered them a job. So we also have panel interviews. A panel is several interviewers. It's usually a mix of people throughout the company. This can be nerve-wracking, but it's an effective use of time. And then we have information interviews, no specific job openings. This is usually just when a candidate is looking to go higher up within the company. So we have meal interviews. This is when you take a candidate to lunch or dinner. This is usually a casual setting, and it's to get information like how their manners are, how they treat other people. It's usually unstructured, so it's general conversation, but you're subliminally answering the questions that they want to know anyway. And group interviews are when you have 2 or more candidates interviewed at the same time. So video interviews are more frequent now with our technology, most commonly Skype. This is just the same thing as a traditional interview, but over video. This is good if you want to save cost. And non-directive is just an unstructured interview where the candidate usually leads a discussion. It's not really that common. So some need to know is, especially in interviews, usually it's not one and done type. You could have different types of interviews within a process. For example, you could have a meal interview followed by a traditional interview, followed by a telephone. And then maybe if you make one of the final rounds, you'll be in a group interview. Also keep in mind open-ended questions. This is your chance to show your ability as your candidate. So now specifically into the interview questions, if there's a situational interview, they'll give you a sample situation, say, how would you handle this? Or there's behavior description interviews, where they'll say, give me a real life example of how you dealt with something like this. So a situational interview, like I just said, they'll give you a situation and say, how would you handle this? 2 examples of that would be, if you saw someone stealing from this company, what would you do? Or you disagree with your supervisor's decisions, how would you handle that? So now into more specific illegal interview questions that everybody should be aware of. I'm going to talk about 7 specific ones. Something that should never be asked or answered is about your national origin. For example, you shouldn't say to somebody, that's a beautiful name. Is it your family name? Or a more appropriate way of asking would be to say, do you have any language abilities that would be helpful towards this job? Another illegal interview question is about age. So we all say the rule of life, never ask a woman how old she is. And it sticks in interviews. So just stay away from the age. If you have to ask, a good way to put it would be, are you over 18, to make sure that they're of legal age, not what year did you graduate high school. Another illegal question would be marital status. As you can see, you can't ask direct questions about marital status or the ages of someone's children. Or of children. So as recruiters, it shouldn't really be your concern anyway, as long as they can do the job. So maybe say, do you have any restrictions on your ability to travel? Another illegal question is religion. So I would say that this is totally off limits. It's actually illegal to ask candidates about their religious affiliation or to ask questions that may indicate a religion-affiliated school or university. So if you're not that concerned if you do have some type of concern about it, maybe ask at a different time. As far as disabilities, this is also illegal. Disability shouldn't be seen as a disadvantage to a company anyway. As you can see the person, not necessarily the disability, although not all disabilities are visible. It's illegal to directly ask if someone has a disability or a recent illness. So as far as criminal record, it's okay to perform a criminal record background check if you notify the person that you are doing this, but it is not appropriate to ask if they've ever been arrested, if they had a felony. We know this as ban the box now in New Jersey. You can now on applications, they don't have the question, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense? So the last illegal question I'll talk about is personal questions. So just avoid these when interviewing or being interviewed, because the situation kind of gets sticky and then you might go down a road that you don't necessarily want to go down. So I would just say an overall rule for all of these are if it doesn't directly relate to the job, just avoid the question. And if you think of something later on, come back and evaluate it. So as future recruiters, there's just some things that you should really be aware of, like don't ask about weight, height, gender. Some might think that's common sense, others might not. As a recruiter, if you're interviewing someone, watch your body language. If you're nodding, they might think they're doing a good job when necessarily they aren't. And try to avoid bias in comparing candidates to each other. So what happens after the interview? At this point, we talked about the selection process, real life versus work life. Tara talked about resumes. I talked about interviews, specifically, I hope you paid attention to what's actually illegal. And now Gina is going to talk about testing.
Hi guys, I'm Gina. I'm going to be talking about testing. So it's basically being able to equally measure someone's skills and ability through a device instead of like just an actual application itself when you hand it in when you are going for a job. Okay, so I know that Bree had mentioned there was multiple types of different kind of tests, but I'm going to go through each one individually and explain a little bit about them. Okay, so I don't know if this is familiar for anyone else. I'm sure we all went through high school. You have to take SATs. So SATs are cognitive ability tests, and basically it measures numerical ability and reasoning. And like I said, one of the most common ones are taking SATs, which include reasoning questionings, math, verbal, and vocabulary skills. Another major type of test is an aptitude test, which can measure your speed of typing or using specific programs at your workplace. I'm going to be talking about a specific time that I had to do this for my internship. So, all right. So I work at I was an intern for Allied Group in Neptune, New Jersey. If any of you live around there. So basically, working in there, I came in and they had asked me if I was good with Excel, if I was good with Word, which most of you, I'm sure, have used before. But they had sat with me and saw if I could multitask between talking on the phone and being able to write down everything through Excel to keep everything updated. So then next is the goal of personality tests is to assess different characteristics or traits that we may not be aware of. For example, someone who is goal-driven might boost morale of a company, including productivity and success. And those are the big 5 of the personality traits. Some self-assessment statements include, I have an aggressive personality, or I'm actually genuinely trusting. And these all fall back on your personality traits, strengths, weaknesses, and so stuff like that. So next is a physical test, and I'm sure this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes, depending on what you're going to be doing, some careers do require it, such as earning a position in the fire department. Some things you may be doing are push-ups, sit-ups, running up and down the stairs for a given amount of time, just so they can see how well you can perform that way. And then this name basically explains itself. So this test focuses on the knowledge of the candidate's duties, the positions they're trying to fill. So basically, they're coming up to you and asking you about that specific job. So these are just some examples of how you would start the question. Work sample tests. A lot of people see this in the fashion industry. If you're going to designs or photography, usually you have a workbook, so that way when you go in, you can show them specific examples of what you've done in the past. Honesty tests are not as popular, but this obviously measures the honesty of the candidate. They aren't as valid due to the fact that you can easily lie and guess the right answer, but honesty is obviously always the best policy, so it's important to be honest when taking any test. All right, so what's next after you have taken your test? After the testing occurs, this is when the company will decide if a background check, driving records, credit history, or anything like that should be given, depending on what kind of work they'll be doing. Like if you're working for UPS, they're gonna look through your driving records to make sure that you haven't gotten pulled over and so forth, like that. So there definitely are some advantages of the selection tests. Having the opportunity to do selection tests help predict your future performance, and it is unbiased, it is measurable, and you're able to compare each applicant's abilities. There are individual rights and test security that go along with the tests. So under the American Psychological Association, test takers have the right to privacy and information, confidentiality to test results, consent, and the people that are qualified to interpret these scores have access, and all testing is fair for everyone. Some key factors when selecting candidates is how they handle situations and obstacles, because everyone obviously in the workforce is going to run into some times where you don't see eye to eye with everyone you're working with. All right, and this is my first job. I worked at an ice cream store. I know it's nothing big, but I ended up being like a manager there. So someone had come in that I was friends with that wanted the job, and they basically explained they had no work experience, but they really thought this would be a great job. And I had to go, and of course I didn't want to hurt their feelings, but I had to decide if they should be selected for the job, because obviously they're my friend. I want them to get the job, but they weren't as experienced in the field. So I unfortunately had to make the decision to not give them the job. So picking the best candidate for the job will, in order to fulfill all the requirements necessary, this is why the careful selection is very important, because not everyone is fit for every single job. So basically after this, obviously there's a bunch of candidates and they come out and basically we felt that you did the best job of showing us your skills and your knowledge of what we want you to bring to the table. And so basically after this, you are now given the job, and Nikki is going to talk about making the offer. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'll be talking to you guys a little bit about making a job offer and training the new employees once you do hire them. I'll talk a little bit about a few different things when it comes to it, interviewing, why you want to interview a certain person, how to make that job offer, what you do when you make that job offer, and then how you would go about properly in training your new employees to make sure they are the best fit for your company. So the first step is choosing the right candidate. You want to carefully go through all of the resumes that you were sent. A lot of the time, HR recruiters will tell you and be straight up. They look at your resume for 5 seconds and they'll move on. So in that 5 seconds that an HR member is looking at your resume, you want to make sure it's the best possible resume it can be. Next is interviewing. When interviewing a potential new hire, you want to make the atmosphere for them as comfortable as it can be, because you really want to be able to get to know them on not necessarily a personal level, but just kind of get more of a feel for what type of person they are and how they are in the interview itself. Interviewing questions, you want to make sure you're asking the right questions. A lot of the time, and I know from previous experience, that behavioral questions really will get you to find out a lot about people. I've been asked, when a customer has yelled at you, how have you handled that situation? And those are the types of questions you want to be asking. Next, I'll talk about salary and benefits. I know that's always the most awkward conversation to have when you are part of an interview. I've been told by my HR leader that she will either let you know or to ask by the second interview, because you don't want to continue with an interview process for a company that you may not like to pay for the benefits. So when you're negotiating salary, when you talk about it going into the job offer, you want to be subtle about it. You want to say why you deserve the a higher pay raise or why you should be paid more compared to just I need the money, and that's just not going to be a good look for anyone. Communicating compensation can get a little ugly, so a lot of the time it will be done through email just to kind of keep it on a one-on-one basis, because when too many people get involved, there will be confusion, and compensation is a key thing. Hiring manager and HR, they're going to be the main people that you talk to and communicate during this interviewing process. And once you are hired, hiring manager is going to be the one that is going to do most of the interviewing. They're going to be looking for people because they're the ones that are really bringing the new candidates into the company. Extending the job offer. Most job offers will either happen in person or over the phone. I know when I got my internship, I received a phone call with my offer. I was able to accept it on the spot, or I was told I could have a day or two, think about it, let them know what I thought about it. So I'm going to go into a little bit about training now. When you're a trainer, you really want to be personable. You want to be someone that is approachable. You want your trainees to feel comfortable talking to you, listening to you, being able to ask you questions, because you can't learn if you can't ask questions and feel comfortable in the setting you're in. Objectives. You want to make sure when you're going through and making that training process that you're looking at all the objectives, you're making end goals. You want to make sure that you're training the best that you can, and at the end of the training session and even a little bit later on, you can definitely look back and say, this worked, this did not. Also budgeting. When you're a trainer, you have to make a budget. I know when I went to my orientation for training for my internship, I received a binder that was about this thick. So they have to budget for being able to print all the papers for you to be able to have if there is extra things. I know my trainer bought us lunch both days, so you have to budget for that as well. Everyone has different learning styles. No one learns the same way. People like to read. That's how they learn. Seeing it, doing it actually in person. So everyone has different styles, and it's important to make sure that you're hitting every target with everyone that you're working with. Your delivery style is also important. You have to make sure, are you going to stand in front of your class and say, this is how I'm going to teach you about your job, this and that? Or are you going to say, go out and do it on your own? I want you to get some field experience. Are you going to have them doing it on the computer? There's different ways. New hires, you want to make them feel comfortable, and you want to make sure you're bringing people that are going to be key assets into your company. You don't want to bring anyone in that you're not comfortable with. You don't think they'll do the job correctly. You just want to make sure you're bringing in people. The content of the training. You want to make sure you're hitting every key aspect of what they need to know. I know within my binder, I could literally find anything and everything you would need to know about enterprise. So you need to make sure you're letting everyone know every single aspect when you're in this training so they can apply it when they go to do it themselves. Next, communication is key. No one will be able to have a good job style and just having good relationships with people if you can't communicate. And if you're not communicating correctly, that people understand what you're talking about. When you're a trainer, and I've talked to the woman that trained me for my internship, you really want to be able to accept feedback. Not everyone is going to like the way that you train them. Not everyone's going to like the style. Some people may love it. But you want to be able to accept that feedback so you can only make the next training session better. And then effectiveness. You want to just make sure what you're teaching is effective. During my training, we sat in a classroom and we learned, but we also did role playing. So we were able to really kind of get a grasp on different things. Even though it wasn't real life, it was still kind of an insight into it. And then I'm just going to wrap up a little bit. I talked about interviewing a little bit and hiring, making an offer to someone. But everything is important when it comes to the whole process. You want to make sure when you're interviewing, looking at the resumes, offering that job, that you are hitting every single key spot, because once you hire someone and you make that offer, you want everything else to go smoothly, and you can't do that unless you start from the beginning. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, cool.
Let me turn it off.
Yeah. I had a problem.
My line plugged in.
Oh, that.